Hi, I'm Cheyenne, and I did my project on The Stranger in the Woods, The Extraordinary Story of the Last True Hermit by Michael Finkel. This book is about a man named Christopher Knight who disappeared into the woods of Maine in 1986 and wasn't found until 2013. So these are photos of Christopher Knight. The photo on the right is a picture of him from his senior yearbook, and the picture on the left is his mugshot from when he was arrested in 2013. So in the 27 years he was in the woods, he got a lot of nicknames from the locals, including the Mountain Man, Hungry Man, the North Pond Hermit, and on some police reports for the cabins he stole from, they didn't know his name, and those police reports require a first and last name, so they put Hermit, which became sort of a nickname. So Maine has a very keep to yourself, ask no questions kind of culture where people are very private usually, and people are generally very trusting of other people. There's a lot of places that are still, as the author said, on the honor system, like a lot of markets where you can leave money in a box and take what you paid for and no one's there to make sure you're not stealing. And in the diagram on the right, you can see all those cabins that line the North Pond. Most of those during the summer stayed unlocked because they figured, well, no one's going to steal. That's not really what we do here. So those are all very vulnerable, and Knight took advantage of that. And also you can see the Pine Tree Summer Camp, which also was left unmanned in the wintertime and usually unlocked. So these are some photos of Knight's camp. So in the diagram, you can see he has a very systematic setup, and it's surprising that he had no army or military experience and not even any camping experience. He'd been camping once in his life with his dad. And you can see he has a wash rock where he would wash both laundry and himself. He also had a dump where he would dispose of food waste and other wastes, and he kept it very clean. You can also see on one of the trees, he has supplies tied to it, and he used the branches to keep his boots dry. And the main area of the camp is his sleeping area, which was a tent inside of a tarp structure that was made of tarp and overlaid garbage bags that made it essentially waterproof. And in that area, he also had a kitchen with a camp stove and stuff that he'd use to cook. And so on the left, you can see a picture of the real campsite. And this campsite was so well hidden by boulders and also the thick woods of the area that it was never found until Knight himself led police there after his arrest. So here's just some more photos of the camp. The one on the left is a picture of Knight with his tent on the day he was arrested. And the other picture is just a closer view of the tarp structure. And you can see he has multiple propane tanks, which he would steal in the wintertime and use to melt water to drink. And he would also use those to fuel his camping stove. I thought it was interesting that there's no mirror on his campsite, but he stayed clean shaven most of the year in the woods. And so when the police found him clean shaven, they asked, well, how do you shave? You don't have a mirror here. And he said, without a mirror. He also said that he likes backup systems, redundancies, and options. So as you can see with the propane tanks, he had a lot of multiples of things in case things ever went wrong or there was a malfunction. He would keep a lot of watches and flashlights in stock, so he would have them in case things went wrong. Also not pictured here, he had a weather station which could tell him what temperature it was without even getting out of bed. He would collect rainwater with buckets to drink the water or to use to wash clothes. He also had no firing or fire pit, so for nearly 30 years, he survived Maine winters without a fire, which is extremely impressive. He also used recycled reading material as flooring, and he had a camping stove, which he used a garden hose to hook up the gas to, and he used that to cook. And one of his favorite meals while he was in the woods was mac and cheese, which I found relatable. So everything Knight had at his camp, besides his eyeglasses, was stolen from local cabins as well as that Pine Tree Summer Camp in the area. And he said, I repeatedly stole over many years. I knew it was wrong, and felt guilty about it every time, yet continued to do it. Knight was raised with very traditional values and strongly believed that stealing was wrong, but his hunger and his drive to survive in isolation drove him to steal. So on the left, you can see a security cam photo of Knight stealing from a cabin, and this picture actually is what got him the nickname the Hungry Man. And in the middle, you can see his burglary kit, and on the right, you can see a cabin that he stole from. So he committed over 1,000 burglaries during his time in the woods, But he never stole anything of significant monetary value. He always stole food. He would occasionally steal books, some gaming systems, always old gaming systems. He said he never wanted to steal one that a kid would actually be using. But he never stole jewelry or anything too personal or valuable because his goal wasn't ever to hurt people. His goal was just to survive. And so he would steal food and other things he needed. And he would also try to leave the places better than when he found them. So if he removed a window to get in, he would replace it. And after a while, people were noticing things were going missing. They started suspecting each other. And eventually they, built up this legend of the hermit. So they started installing alarm systems. But because Knight has previous experience with alarm systems, he was able to either get around them or even disarm them completely and continue to steal. So while Knight was in the woods, he did a lot of camp chores and stuff like that to keep him busy, but he also said he did a lot of nothing and mostly daydreaming and watching nature, which was what he set out to do. He also said, "I was never lonely. If you like solitude, then you're never alone," which I thought was really poignant. He also described the harsh Maine winters as physical, emotional, psychological pain. And he had a lot of strategies to survive the winter without a fire. So he would wake up in the coldest time of night to keep himself moving so he wouldn't get hypothermia. He would grow out his beard to keep warm. And he would also, just before winter, put on weight by stealing more alcohol and sugary foods and eating them. He also, while he was in the woods, you can see a radio. That was a radio he stole. He stole that radio as well as a TV, and he would hook the TV up to car or boat batteries to watch TV in the woods. And I thought it was interesting that he talked about what he liked and disliked in the woods. So he loved reading Shakespeare and Emily Dickinson. He also loved the Civil War documentary by Ken Burns on PBS. He loved to listen to Seinfeld on the radio and make up his own visual aspects of the show. And then he also loved Lynyrd Skynyrd and said that 1,000 years from now we'll still be listening to Lynyrd Skynyrd. And his dislikes were John Grisham novels. He said he would actually use the paper or the pages from John Grisham novels as toilet paper when he ran out. He disliked Thoreau, surprisingly, as Thoreau was a pretty outdoorsy guy, but he said Thoreau wasn't a true hermit and wasn't actually in touch with the stuff he talked about. And he also disliked most of PBS besides that Civil War documentary. And in the bottom picture, I thought this was really interesting. It's a mushroom that Knight kind of treated as a pet. He never wanted a real pet because he didn't want to ever have to compete with it for food or eat it if things got so desperate. So he really looked after and watched and observed this mushroom the entire time he was in the woods. And his biggest concern when he got arrested was that the police had knocked it over. But thankfully they did not. So his arrest was in 2013. The man at the bottom right is Sergeant Terry Hughes. So he had set up these sensors in the Pine Tree kitchen where if there was movement, it would set off an alarm at Sergeant Hughes's house. And so one night he heard the alarm, and so he rushed to the Pine Tree summer camp and found Knight stealing, as you can see in the security cam footage. And he arrested him without a struggle. Knight confessed to everything. And when they asked him, when did you go into the woods? Because they weren't even sure. Even though they had seen burglaries for years, they didn't know exactly when it had started. And Knight said that he didn't remember the year, but he asked them when Chernobyl was. And he immediately regretted asking because he thought it made him sound like a crazy environmentalist, but really that was just the last thing he remembered seeing on the news before going into the woods and losing track of time. So Knight was taken to Kennebec County Jail, where he couldn't afford bail, so he stayed until his trial. And as you can see, he grew out a beard as kind of a jail calendar, as he called it, but also as kind of a security blanket to mask himself and his emotions from those around him. And you can see he lost a lot of weight because he lost his appetite due to being so anxious in jail. He was very quiet, as he hadn't spoke to anyone other than one person the entire time he was in the woods. So he hadn't really had that conversation, and the other prisoners described him as talking like he was a book because that's all he'd done for so long is read books, that he talked in that same kind of language. He also said that more damage has been done to my sanity in jail in months than years, decades in the woods. He was extremely anxious. As I said, he didn't eat. And he longed for that solitary confinement. He had a cellmate most of his months in jail, but eventually he was put into solitary. During his trial, he was sentenced to 7 months of jail, most of which 7 months in jail, most of which he'd already served. So he only had to serve 1 more week. And then he was also sentenced that once he was released, he would need to seek psychological counseling, show up to court every Monday for a year to keep him accountable. He would be fined $2,000 that would be distributed among the people he stole from. He would have to live at home, get a job, do community service, and also be subject to random drug testing. So basically, he was going to be confined to living in society. He would never be able to go back to the woods like he wanted. And he, after getting the sentence, he said, "I don't know your world. There are blank spots in my skill set. I have to figure out how to live." And so he said that transitioning from jail to society was worse than transitioning from the woods to jail, because jail still had a strict schedule and he could enter a sort of silent defensive survival mode. Whereas in real life, he would have to be around people and he would have to, integrate back into society. And that was challenging for him. So after jail, he was surprisingly compliant with the demands and found a way to acclimate and live in our world. And he got a job working for his brother's scrap metal company, which he could do alone at home. He started reaching out to a woman he knew in high school, and they became good friends. He said it's nothing romantic. She's not his girlfriend, but that they are good friends. And he was surprisingly compliant. He expressed some sadness to the author during a visit after jail, but over time, he started to accept that this was his life now and that things were going to be okay. And one thing Knight said was he wasn't big on giving out bouts of wisdom from his time in the woods, because he didn't go to the woods for a spiritual awakening. He just went to the woods because that's where he liked to be. But there were some things he said that really resonated with me and I think were important to share. So one thing he said was to get enough sleep, which really resonated with me because I know that when I get enough sleep, I feel much better. And I think everyone nowadays is sleep deprived. He also said that the idea that there's somewhere we have got to get to and something we have to attain is our basic delusion. This really resonated with me because nowadays everything is so go, 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 and everything's so focused on achievement, whereas a lot of times our purpose is just to live. Like, we need to slow down and enjoy life the way he did. And, he got to experience this profound silence and this union with nature that a lot of us will never get to experience. But I think it's still important to find those moments and just live, not focus on, what am I going to do tomorrow? Where am I going to be in 2 years? Just focus on the now. And then the author, from what he learned about Knight, said, modern life seems set up that we can avoid loneliness at all costs, but maybe it's worthwhile to face it occasionally. And I thought this was really timely with COVID and everything going on, that we kind of have to seek out those moments of quiet and solitude to appreciate the time we get to spend with each other. At the beginning of lockdown, I thought, I'm going to be fine. I'm an introvert. I like to be alone. But after months of loneliness, it really, it drains you. Whereas I think it drains us more nowadays because we're constantly connected to each other. Whereas when you kind of have experience with loneliness, it's not as hard. So I think we need to seek out those moments of quiet and solitude so that when we are alone, it's less of a torture and more of like a silent retreat and makes us appreciate each other more. So that's really what I got from this. I really, really enjoyed this book and I think everyone should read it. It was really interesting. And there's so much more detail that I didn't have time to go into about Knight and his experiences in the woods, but I think it's really fascinating.